Good afternoon, ladies and gents. We're here live at Buckfast on the South Devon Railway again. So today we're looking at Class 25 diesels. We've got two of them here. So just wait for a few more to join us, and then we'll get stuck in. Thanks everyone who's been joining us on these live videos. It's great to have you along. Hopefully you've been enjoying them. Make sure you keep the comments and questions coming in. We'll do our best to keep answering those for you. Okay, so we'll move on to Rodney now, who you'll probably remember from previous weeks. He's going to start us off. Hello, Rodney.
Well, hello, ladies and gents, and welcome again to the South Devon Railway. Welcome to yet another nice afternoon in Devon. As Ernie said, we're going to talk about the Class 25 diesel electric this afternoon. But firstly, I've got to start by thanking you all so much for your donations towards our appeal. The response has been fantastic, and we have now got just short of 180,000. This is going to ensure the future of the South Devon Railway, so thank you so much. And if you feel so inclined after you've watched this broadcast, please reach into those deep pockets, and anything that you can spare, no matter how small or how big, will be very, very welcome towards our appeal. Secondly, we've been down here today, we've done a thorough security check of the premises, and we're doing this incidentally like we have over the last few weeks. What I would like to say, especially to all our volunteers, is that our management team at the moment, behind the scenes, are getting it together so that when the government releases the restrictions just a little bit more, which will be very, very soon, we're going to have organised groups of volunteers on the site. This will be coordinated by heads of department right down through the chain of command, so that we all can do what we all want to do, and that's get back to working on the South Devon Railway. So I'd just like to say hello to Carol Grice, John Davis, Carol Morris, Andy Blowfield, Ricky West and Gareth Bernard. Ricky West being one of my colleagues from First Great Western. Anyway, the last two broadcasts that I've done, firstly we dealt with a very specialised steam locomotive, 1369, and last week we talked about running, or last time, we talked about running a branch passenger service with an auto train, a push-pull train with a steam locomotive. We're going to move another step forward today, and we're going to look at what would have been traditional branch line traction on the South Devon Railway had it not closed to passengers in 1958 and freight in 1962. Those of you that know any history about the branch will know that the two principal freight commodities were the wool traffic down in Ashburton and the cider traffic at Staverton. If that had perpetuated on into BR days and into diesel days, we would have been, for a dead cert, using Class 25 locomotives. Why am I so sure? Because as a former Exeter driver, all our freight trip work, which we will talk about later on, and a lot of our branch passenger work to Paynton and to Barnstable was with a Class 25 and coaches. So the Class 25, a diesel electric locomotive. What's a diesel electric? What we've got a chassis, and we've got two four-wheeled trucks called bogies. These are what eases the locomotive around the curves. So instead of having a big fixed wheelbase like a steam locomotive, we've got the two bogies, one either end. Supported on the frames, inside the bodywork, we have got a 1,250 horsepower Sulzer engine. And it's a 6-cylinder engine in line. In other words, the cylinders are vertical, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, stood up. So it's a 6-cylinder inline Sulzer engine, and that drives an electrical generator called a main generator. The main generator principally produces electricity to go down to a series of 4 electrical motors, one on each axle, called the traction motors. And these are what actually drive the axles to make the locomotive go along. As well as driving a main generator, The 6-cylinder Sulzer engine also drives an auxiliary generator which provides current for all what we call the auxiliaries: compressors, exhausters, lighting, and basically every other electrical source on the locomotive. So let's have a look at the locomotive. It's got two ends. It's got a number 1 end and a number 2 end, and it's got 2 cabs, which obviously makes it a lot easier for shunting. I'd just like to say hi to Francis Wadsworth, Chris Sutton on the Bodmin, Daniel Dawson, Troy Trevains, Ellen Dujon, and John Cahan. Hello, John Cahan, otherwise known as Topham Hat of Thomas fame. So hello to you, John. We look forward to seeing you back again. Moving back to the Class 25, so we've got a diesel electric locomotive sat on 2 bogies. Now, when we talk about a steam locomotive, when we talk about the layout of the wheels, we talk about a 262 or an 060. So that is 2 pony wheels, 6 big driving wheels, and 2 pony wheels, 262. The diesels adopted a continental system. So what we've got, because we've got 2 4-wheel bogies, we use the prefix B. So it's a BB, or because it's got no pony wheels, a BO/BO, or Bobo. So that's the wheel layout. So it's 2 4-wheel bogies, it's diesel electric, and it's got 2 ends from which we control it. Very, very versatile, a very lightweight locomotive, and ideal for snaking around the most dubious track, which is what we used to do on some of the freight work. You'll also notice, if you look at the cab side windows, they're very, very low slung, which means that you get an incredible view when you're looking back carrying out shunting operations. Along the side of the locomotives, you can see the bogie frames. The yellow circular pieces there, those are the roller bearings. Those are the actual axle boxes. Here we can see the suspension system, and it's got 2 suspension systems. It's got the primary suspension system inside and the secondary suspension system on the outside. Basically, it's like a truck which is on a swivel that sits down and is sprung onto the bogie. So it gives it side play, and it also takes a lot of the bounce out of the joints when it's going along. So they're quite well suspended. You wouldn't think it when they're doing 90 mile an hour, but they do have quite good suspension. Hello to Derek Blake, Thomas Gale and Ian Yolland. How are you? Jonathan Fry. Would a Class 63 be ideal to work the line had not been scrapped? Oh yes, please. If only we had a little Class 63 down here, that would be wonderful. The Class 63 shares something very, very common with the Class 25. Basically, it did what it said on the tin. It wasn't spectacular, it didn't work crack express trains, it was a normal, everyday loco that did the job that it was intended for, mixed traffic work, passenger and freight. So looking along the side of the locomotive, as I say, we've got our 2 bogies with our 2 wheels on, we've got our axle boxes, we've got our suspension systems. If we move along, here we've got our underslung fuel tank. Now this locomotive, you'll see the fuel tank there. In here are the batteries that actually start the locomotive up, and here we've got a big gap. So why have we got such a big gap? That's because one size fits all. This locomotive was built primarily for freight work, whereas other locomotives were built to do both freight and passenger and were provided with a steam heating boiler. And this location is where the steam heating boiler fuel tank would have been. And then we move swiftly on, we come to the second bogie. You can see the brake blocks on the wheels there. These are all part of the driver's checks as he or she goes around to get it ready. Again, we've got the suspension on the second bogie, and then we come to the cab. This is, at the moment, the rear end cab, because we're up near the stop blocks. And now we can look at the front. If we look at the front of a diesel locomotive, it's a lot more complex than a steam locomotive, because whereas we talked about having 2 mediums on a steam locomotive, that is the steam brake and the vacuum brake, we introduce a 3rd medium on a diesel locomotive, and that is compressed air, which drives most of the control systems. So I think now we're going to go and have a look in the driving cab. Hello Dave Hall, Adam Leading, Steve Turner. Steve Turner wants to visit here. I don't blame you, and we're so looking forward, as I say, to getting back to being able to come down and volunteer and work together. Will Fry says, "Hey up, Rod." I say, "Hope you're getting on, mate." That's a Devon reply to a northerner's greeting. So we're going to have a look now, I believe, up in the driving cab.
Don't know if you want to mention, Rodney, that they're not normally sheeted down like that.
Basically, because of the situation that we're in, the very sad situation that we're in, these locomotives would normally be up and running, ready to go, to share the burden of responsibility with the steam locos, but because they're not in use at the moment, they have been sheeted down, A, to keep the water out of the exhaust ducts, and B, to protect the paintwork. Because as you can see, these locomotives, the paintwork has been beautifully done. These locomotives, incidentally, are part of South Devon Diesel Traction, one of two diesel groups that we've got operational on the South Devon Railway, the other being the Devon Diesel Society. And indeed, both groups have got quite a diverse range of traction. The Class 37 you can see there is Devon Diesel Society. These are South Devon Diesel Traction, and our friends in the Devon Diesel Society have also got an 04 and a Class 50, so you don't get much more diverse than that. South Devon Diesel Traction have got these two beautiful 25s and a Class 33 that is currently being worked on. Hello Chris Meads, hope you're off today. Mark Hallett from the Mid-Norfolk and Francis Wanworth. Oh, they've had 7612 at the Spa Valley. This is 7612, and what a wonderful locomotive it is.
Right, so we're going to go up into the cab now. Got a familiar face that some of you may recognise. As usual, asleep in the chair. Hello to John Morton, who's many of you will know as the chairman of the South Devon Railway Board of Directors, and also absolutely infamous driver from Exeter Depot. Hello John.
Hello everybody, nice to see you. This is my first time doing this, so bear with me if I don't get it quite right. I can hear Rodney outside running through the workings and the outside details of the Class 25. So we're now in the cab, driving controls, which are replicated both ends. They're pretty well exactly the same, one end to the other. So it allows the driver to change ends either through the engine room or around the outside or on the platform and switch in and drive from the other end. So I'll go through the controls first of all, and I'll go in a clockwise fashion. So first of all here we've got what we would call the automatic brake, and this controls the brake on the train, whether it's in vacuum or air brake mode, and simultaneously controls the brake on the locomotive. So that's the function of that. And again, obviously there's one the other end, and you pin it out of use like that when you change ends. So I'll open it up again because we're operational in this cab. This control here is what's known as the straight air brake or the direct air brake, and that controls the brake on the locomotive only. So on a freight train, for example, that has no continuous brakes through the train, we would control the train using the straight air brake. If we're light loco, that is a loco on its own, we again use the straight air brake, running round, shunting, etc. And then we've got a few other smaller controls: windscreen wiper operation, start, stop, rear horn. Let's start the engine, stop the engine. Press that button to sound the rear horn in the rear cab. We've got a horn, you can't see it down here, as an up and down lever. That's the AWS reset. Alfie Gascoigne, Matt Southett, I hope that got that right. Chris Fitch, Dale Stammer's going to visit. Stuart Butler, great insight. Yes, Stuart, you'd make a driver one day. It's all right, he's a driver at work and get away with that. Yes, where were we? Dimmer switch for the instrument lights, quite important. 3 fault lights. One is engine stopped, one is wheel slip, and one is a general fault. And when they're running normally, they're dim. When you get a fault, they go bright. So red light bright is a problem because it's the engine has stopped. And then we've obviously now got a key to put in to unlock the desk. Again, changing ends, we lock the desk up. And this is the reverser. That's now in engine only. I cannot open the power controller in engine only. I can open the power controller in forward and in reverse, but when it's switched off, it's all locked up again, but it's locked. So that's a safety thing. So I'll go back to it and put it back into engine only just so it looks a bit decent. We've then got some gauges. The first one is the air brake pipe pressure for the train. So if we're working an air brake train, that would indicate the brake pressure on the train. Hi, Richard Smith, Jonathan Martin, Chris Meads. Are you doing a Class 57.6 refresher as well? I'll do one for you, Chris, if you wish. Yes. And then we've got another gauge here, which is a dual gauge, and it's to do with the vacuum. So there's a vacuum chamber side and the train pipe side. So again, if you're applying the brake, that needle would drop from the normal 21 inches down to 0 if you put it all the way in. The chamber side is the control side that gives us the proportionality between the train and the loco. If I'm getting too complicated, tell me. The next gauge shows the application of the brakes on the locomotive only. So bogie 1 and bogie 2, that's this one, the straight air brake. That is fairly obvious. It says MPH, and that's a speedometer. The next one, as Rodney may have touched on, couldn't quite hear, that as this is a diesel electric, this shows the ammeter output from the generator, which obviously when you open the power controller would increase. And there's more complications to that, but we might touch on that in a minute. The next gauge is the AWS, Automatic Warning System Sunflower, which goes black when you have a green signal with a bell, and it goes dartboard stripy colour like this is now if you have any other adverse indications, such as yellow signal and other warnings. This last gauge here is the main air reservoir and main air pipe. No air, no go. Obviously there's a compressor or two compressors on this loco that create air pressure. That air pressure is used to control everything in terms of brakes and engine control. Mike Wall, hello. Ashley Andrew Banfield, please can we have a doubting of the diesel gala one year? We did about 10, 12 years ago, but it'd be nice to have one back, yes. If you can quite see on that side, there's a big wheel that looks like a steering wheel. All it really is a parking brake. So when you leave the locomotive and it's all locked up, that's wound on, because when the air disappears from the system, as it will, there's no brakes. So that stops the locomotive from rolling away. I think I've covered everything. We both worked on these, didn't we, Rodney?
We did. We certainly
back
did.
in the day.
We certainly did. And it's nice to be sat in the second-man side again, I must admit.
Yeah, well, you can always come over. I might let you have a go in a minute.
It feels more familiar sat over here, I must admit, on the second-man side. As John touched on just now, this is the handbrake to apply the actual parking brake. It's also useful for other things as well when you're on a long ballast job. And one of my endearing memories of the Class 25s is rattling along on jointed track with the engine swaying away like that, and just the ting, ting, ting of the single line token hung on the handbrake just to punctuate the time, basically. But we had some good times on these, didn't we?
Yeah.
How about the Meath goods?
Meath and 3 o'clock Barnstable, one of our favourite turns.
Oh, that's yes, that's something that John and I used to compete with. It became the last steam heated job at Exeter, and I liked playing with boilers, and I think John did. So we used to change turns week in and week out to try and get a Class 25 on the 3 o'clock Barnstable, one of only 2 mixed trains on British Railways. This train left Exeter St David's at 3 o'clock for Barnstable, and it consisted of 2 vacuum brake passenger coaches, a selection of parcel vans full up with brute loads of mail and mail bags full of mail, and very often a freight tail. And as I understand it, you might be able to correct me, but the only other mixed train on the railway was on the West Highland line. So John, I believe you worked on, did you work on these at Coventry as well?
Yes, I did, yes. It's all right, somehow or other there's our auto cue has got a block in the middle. Thank you.
No, it's gone.
Right, hi Vince Neal, Jonathan Martin, love 25s, excellent engines. Robert Kitley, that handbrake needs a polish now, Rod.
Doing it, John, doing
yes.
it.
So, when I moved up to Coventry, if any of the Devon Diesel Society members, of which I'm the chairman, have read my exploits that I put in a part work in there, I did write a few things about Class 25s and how I moved to Coventry to become a driver. And the staple diet at Coventry was 08s, 25s and electric multiple units. So we always had 2 Class 25s there, so I spent hours and hours and hours shunting, driving coal trains around, derailing even on one occasion with the 25. That's a story really that is enough time has gone past now. We used to book on in the morning, 6 in the morning, with a Class 25 and take out some merry-go-round empties from Coventry to Three Spires, about 3 miles up the line, in 2 hits, as in 2 lots of, one train in 2 portions. Took the first portion in and became derailed on the point work in the yard due to kids putting coal or something in the point work, which derailed our loco basically. And I thought, well, I've got to go back and get the other load. By that time, a totem driver had turned up with a Class 45 Peak. And he was having his meal break, so I said, could I borrow your Peak, driver? And he said, yeah, no problem. So I took this Peak back to Coventry, picked up the second load of merry-go-round wagons, put him in the yard, didn't derail, and gave him back his loco. And I think I eventually learnt Peaks officially about 8 years later. So I didn't actually sign the traction. Hello from Alfred, age 3. Hello, Alfred. Can't wait to visit. Chris Vines, currently watching from my car in Torrington Station. Hope you're stationary. Bob Pickering, hi from Florida. Hi, Florida. Bet it's hot there. So that's one of the many stories of mine. I'm sure that Rodney's probably got one. I'll put you back to Rodney while he can think of something.
There's a mention. As far as I'm concerned, the best job on the railway, the Barnstable goods, booking on at 5:35. A goods train with one of these down to Barnstable, and then came the best bit. Once we'd shunted Barnstable marshalling yard and we'd sorted the clay empties out, we used to go from Barnstable right the way down to Meath, and that used to follow the Torridge all the way down, beautiful countryside. 40 mile an hour as far as Instow, and then it went down to 20, and it was 20 miles all the way down, 20 mile an hour all the way down to Meath, going through some of the most glorious North Devon countryside, passing the beautiful little signal box in Instow, and stopping at Torrington to speak to the shunter. Do you remember Bud?
Oh yeah,
the Bud, the shunter.
Don't call me Bud.
That's right. A very nice gentleman, Harry Beer, who was sadly left us. But one of those characters that you met on that sort of work, and I can honestly say, hand on heart, the one thing that I never understood on those sort of jobs is why they paid me for doing it. I would have done it for nothing.
It was just like, really, it was like steam days without the steam engines in North Devon, wasn't it?
It
With
was.
all the old signals, and
It
it
was.
just hadn't changed at all, really. And mind you, I suppose in 74, 75 when I started, it was not long after the end of steam anyway. Hi, Gary, HN in Tasmania. That's a new one. We haven't had a Tasmanian before, assuming you are. Russell Newman, hello there. What regions of British Rail did Class 25s mostly work in?
Everyone.
We'd probably say they worked in every region except the southern. Although early days Class 24s worked in the southern, but probably they were most prolific on the Midland and Scotland, really, I suppose. Less so on the eastern, a little bit on the western, but Midland, really. Now, I'm being directed by our auto queue operator that we ought to start moving into the engine room.
Yes, yeah, let's go and have a
so
look in the
Rodney's
engine
going
room.
to take you into the engine room.
So
Alan,
we talked about
going in that the way.
this being a diesel electric locomotive, and let's go and have a look at the engine first. So if we come round here, there we have our 6-cylinder inline Salter engine. So the cylinders you can count from here. You can see the tops of them here: 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And as I say, they're inline or vertical. We talked about the main generator, and that one is this end. This is a huge generating set here that generates the current to go down to the traction motors to drive the wheels. And then on the same axis, just up here, we've got a smaller generator called the auxiliary generator, and that provides the electricity for everything else. Compressors to make the compressed air, vacuum exhausters to create the vacuum, and every other electrical feature. Helen Bryant would love to be out on a steamer now. Oh, yes, I quite agree, but I also think it's nice to be on a Class 25. Ryan Skinner, they were nicknamed rats, as they were commonest rats on BR. That's right, thank you, Ryan, I was going to bring that up. Everywhere you went, there was a 25. They were their predecessors, the 63s, the diesel hydraulics. They were peculiar to the western region, but the 25s were everywhere. And sadly, when the last 63 went in 1971, the 25s stroke Class 31s took over their duties. David Higgs, feels like I'm having a fantastic day out at the South Devon, even though I'm in South London. Well, hello David, hope that you can join us at some point. Once the emergency is over, please do come down and see us and tap us on the shoulder, and if you want to know anything, please ask. So, moving swiftly on, as I say, there's our engine, there's our diesel engine, there's our main generator, and then tucked in here, we've got our auxiliary generator. I talked about compressors. Everything on a diesel electric locomotive is either electrical or work by compressed air. And the two compressors are what create that compressed air to work all the control systems. As you can see, we have to duck down a little bit because they're not renowned for having much room, diesel electric locomotives. We're going to the other end of the engine again. On the top here, or just down here rather, you can see a traction motor blower for cooling the traction motors. That is basically like a big fan that puts coolish air down onto the traction motors because they get so hot. Earlier on we talked about the vacuum brake and the necessity to create a vacuum to apply the brake with, and here are the two pieces of equipment that do that. These are the two vacuum exhausters. What we're going to do now, we're going to walk down the other side of the engine and we can have a look at the other bits and pieces that are associated with the engine. This big tunnel that we're stood in at the moment, this is the coolant tank. This is where the coolant is kept, and down here we've got a little gauge. I hope you can see that. It's a little bit dark, but there's a gauge there and a gauge there that tells us how much coolant we've got. By coolant I mean water and a mix of antifreeze, and also a corrosion inhibitor. So collectively combined it's known as coolant. Oh, by the way, Chris Meads, refresher on 57s, don't need it, just keep the fire up in the back corners, Chris, 3/4 of a glass of water, she'll go all day. 25, Chris says, 25s are one class of loco I wish I have signed. Right, don't tell anyone, keep this to yourself, but I didn't actually sign class 25s on BR, as John did. I only learnt them on the South Devon Railway, because when I became a driver, I'm junior to John, and the 25s are gone. I learnt the 31s and the 33s, but never the 25s. Tom Curtis, what were common causes of failures for class 25s? Well, actually, they were pretty reliable engines. Common cause, can you think of any common cause for a failure on a 25, John? Very often with salter engines.
Traction motors were a bit of a weak point. They were quite often overstressed with current heavy loads.
Oh, there we are. Traction motor overloads, apparently. The fault that I knew of on a class 25 that it shares with a class 45 is when somebody hadn't done something. In other words, it hadn't had fuel, it hadn't had water, or it hadn't had lube oil. Other than that, they were a pretty reliable loco. They didn't really fail that much at all. Anyway, moving swiftly on, let's go past this side of the engine. We've got various controls in the engine room here. Funny enough, talking about failures, for instance, if the engine started to rotate too fast, in other words, we had an engine overspeed, the engine was working too fast, it's got like a governor arrangement on that will shut it down. It will drop out the fuel racks and everything, and it will shut the engine down. That's the lever that we use to reset that. Ashley Andrew Banfield, do you guys know if the diesel gala is going ahead this year? Is the diesel gala? Well, we don't know yet. We're really hoping, fingers and everything else crossed. Charlotte Langley, I know that name from somewhere. Hello from Exeter St David's. Oh, that's my wife. That's probably why. Hello, Mrs. How are you? Moving swiftly on, here is our 6-cylinder engine. Here's our main generator, and you'll also notice these big red fire bottles. These are actually connected to heat detectors throughout the engine room, and should the heat detectors detect an excessive amount of heat in the engine room, it will sound the fire alarms in the cabs, and it will also discharge these fire bottles. So when we come in the engine room, what we have to do, we have to make sure that these safety pins are in. With the safety pin in like that, the fire bottle won't discharge. When they're taken out, which is part of our preparation to make sure that they are taken out, the system is live. So if there was an excessive temperature in here, the bells would ring either end and these big fire bottles would discharge. This side we can get a better view. There's our main generator, and there, actually coupled to it, is our auxiliary generator for all the other pieces of equipment. this is what we call the brake frame. On here we've got all the electrical and pneumatic braking equipment for the locomotive, and we've got banks of isolating cocks for isolating the brakes on both bogies, both types of brake. You remember that John said that we've got a proportional brake and a straight air brake? Well, we've got a straight air brake and a proportional brake on both bogies, so we've got 4 brake isolating cocks. And also other isolating cocks associated, like the driver's safety device can be isolated. The actual 2-inch cock, as we call it, for the air vacuum relay valve. That's all on this frame, so it's quite convenient like that. We then move on. We've got the electrical cubicle. Inside the electrical cubicle, we've got all the contactors for everything. We've got the reversing contactors, traction motor contactors, and field divert contactors. What are they? Well, we've talked about how we change gear on a steam engine. Let's talk about how we change gear on a diesel. When the diesel engine is running, when the driver opens the power handle, he actually creates maximum traction current. And with any vehicle that's starting away from stop, it needs that maximum effort, like when you're riding a bicycle, you pedal hard to get going, but once you get going, you don't need all that power. Diesel traction is the same. Basically what happens is, as the speed increases, the excessive electricity produced by the main generator is fed into banks of resistors until such time as, when we're in top gear, if you like, and we're sailing along, we only need minimum traction current, maximum stages of what we call resistance. So this is the electrical cubicle. Now we come into the last cubicle, which used to be the boiler compartment, or is on some locos. This was a freight loco, so consequently on this loco we've got the 2 compressors which generate all the compressed air in use on the locomotive. And now we come through into the rear cab.
And he's here again, there's 2 of them.
There's 2 of them again. The rear cab, as you can see, is very much like the leading cab. Robert Johnson, was this loco a southern-based locomotive or northern, as like the 26s? As John
Bescott,
said,
really. This was a Bescott engine most of the time.
These weren't really based on the southern. The Class 24s, when they initially came out, were, but the 25s, I believe, weren't really based on the southern.
No.
Oh, hello to Ian Rosewell at Exeter Panel Signal Box. Hello to all the signalmen at Exeter Panel Signal Box and all signalmen throughout British Railways. Best wishes to all of you, many of whom I know by name and used to wave to. You'll spot the tea-can on the front desk, so hello to all of you. The one big difference now, we're going to move on to the most essential piece of equipment on this locomotive, and there it is, the can boiler. That's where we sit the tea can, that's where we switch it on, and that's where we can make a nice can of tea when we're going along. So basically, ladies and gents, that is a very brief introduction to the Class 25, and we do hope you've enjoyed it very much. All I would like to say, I'd like to reiterate again that we are working on getting groups of volunteers to come back and work on the South Devon Railway. So be patient with our current management team. We're working on it. And again, thank you ever so much for all your generous donations. If you can spare a few quid to go towards our appeal, then we would really appreciate it, so that we can keep the South Devon going, steam and diesel, for future generations.
Thank you very much for watching us and indulging us, and we'll come back to see you soon. And as Rodney says, donate.